Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Justin Mogilski, and this is Psych 101, Introduction to Psychology. The first thing that I teach any of my students is that when someone gets in front of you and says that they're going to be teaching you something for an extended period of time, you should probably figure out what their credentials are. What qualifies them to lecture to you about this topic? I'm going to give you two lines of evidence. One, I'm a doctor. I've earned a PhD. What that means is I spent a considerable amount of time training in a very particular domain of knowledge. Having a doctorate does not mean that you know everything. In fact, quite the opposite. It makes you keenly aware of what you do not know. There's a vastness to human knowledge, and I only have access, any one of us only has access to a very small sliver of it. Number two, though, what I've done, so I am a professor, I teach, it's something that I enjoy incredibly, but part of my job is not just that I teach, but I have to perform scholarship or original research. To do that, what I do is I actually collect data from people. I formulate hypotheses based on prior theory. I then create surveys, experiments, collect data from people, both in South Carolina and throughout the world, to test those hypotheses, gather data to perform statistical analyses, test the hypotheses, write up the results. I then submit those results to what's called a peer-reviewed journal. And from there, my work gets vetted for quality by my peers. Those of you who are not familiar with what a peer-reviewed journal is, you take the data that you've collected, you submit it somewhere, and these are other people within the field that you've collected this data who are not motivated necessarily to see you publish. They rip apart your methods, they question how you've collected that data, they question how you've interpreted that data, and hopefully after this very long and arduous process, it gets published somewhere. So what I have done is I've collected data, I've tested these kinds of hypotheses for a good long while, and I've published a number of peer-reviewed articles on very broadly relationship science, human mating, the things that people do within romantic, sexual, and intimate relationships. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sampler of where I published and what kinds of topics I have published on. Very broadly, I've looked at things like mate poaching, which is when if you are single, instead of seeking someone who is currently single as well to start a romantic relationship, you go after someone who's currently in a romantic relationship. I've looked at the various reasons that people dissolve their relationships, why people break up. And this is a particular example published back in 2016, titled Staying Friends with an Ex, Sex and Dark Personality Traits Predict Motivations for Post-Relationship Friendship. One of the unique contributions of this particular study is we wanted to know when people break up and then they stay friends with their ex, why do they do it? Prior to this research, there hadn't been really a documented, comprehensive list of reasons that people stayed friends with their exes. So what we did was we asked people, well, why do you stay friends with an ex? We took these many reasons that were ACT nominated to us. We then created a measure that people could fill out where we identified about 7 different reasons. And I want to highlight a couple of them. One, things like reliability and sentimentality. That is, they wanted to stay friends with an ex because they were an important part of the person's life. They had an ongoing friendship together. They were someone who they had shared secrets with, someone who they leaned on for emotional support, and they didn't want to give that up. And that was the most common reason. The second, unfortunately most common reason, were what we labeled pragmatic reasons. And these were things like, well, they had a lot of money, or they had a car and they were capable of driving me to work. Then there were some other reasons like, well, we shared a social network. That is, we had friends together, and so we didn't want to make things awkward in that friendship group. Or we had children together, and we wanted to stay amiable. We wanted to stay friendly for the sake of the children. And then also one of the reasons that popped up was I wanted to continue to have sex with this person. So we identified these different reasons, and then we looked at some of the predictors, some of the things that predict whether you report that you've stayed friends with an ex for one of those particular reasons. And we examined 2 characteristics. One, whether a person reported being male or female. And then also these traits that are called dark personality traits. Very broadly, these refer to a person's willingness to exploit another person for personal gain. That is, are you willing to do something shitty to another person if it personally benefits you? So we found a couple of interesting findings here. One, that first off, men, unsurprisingly, perhaps are more willing to stay friends with an ex in order to continue to have sex with that person compared to women. Everyone was more likely to report staying friends with an ex for those reliability, sentimentality. They were there as a friend. They wanted to keep them as a friend. But in terms of these dark personality traits, so what happens is we can measure these traits using an inventory, and people score relatively higher or lower on that trait. That is, they're more willing to exploit other people for personal gain, or they're less willing. People who reported greater willingness to do that were more likely to report staying friends with an ex for those pragmatic reasons. That is, that person was simply useful to them. They had money, they could fix stuff, they could drive them places, and also, again, to have sex with their partner. So revealing some of the motivations behind why people stay friends with their ex-partners. Aside from looking at romantic relationships, part of romance is competition, is attraction, not just between people who are looking to get into a relationship, but often conflict among those who may be seeking a similar partner. And so I've looked at different types of conflict, fighting, and what happens after fights that you might observe. Now, if anyone's gone onto YouTube and you've just searched for street fights, you'll find tons on there. If you look up these videos, you'll see people who have recorded actual fights, usually between men, where they wail on one another. They get into these really deep, sometimes bloody fist fights. And then afterwards, they almost always engage in a particular behavior, shaking hands. This is something that you see after many different types of conflict. You'll see this in sporting events. What happens is you go out on the field, you play that game, and no matter who wins or who loses, one of the first things that coaches often encourage their players to do is go to the other team and shake their hand. Now, what this is described as is it's good sportsmanship, right? You're showing respect for the other team. But in terms of the function of that behavior, what it does is it makes it less likely that in the future, if, say, there are tensions left over from the conflict, you've got this lingering resentment towards one another, what shaking hands can do is it can make it less likely that will occur, that future conflict will occur in the future. That is, you want to stay on good terms with one another. So the reason that coaches often encourage good sportsmanship is it's not arbitrary. It's to make sure that in the future you stay on good terms with these people that you'll continue to have an interaction with. Now, this isn't something that you just see in humans. Non-human primates do this as well. I actually had the fortune to work in a primate lab several years ago, where I got to observe baboons. Baboons are these kind of very large primates, and they're very what's called sexually dimorphic. That is, the differences between males and females within the species is quite noticeable. And one of the big differences is that the males tend to be much larger, more muscular, and when housed with other males, they tend to get aggressive. They tend to get territorial. And what you can often see is if two males are within a shared enclosure, they'll often get into fights. It might be bloody. They might pull hair out from one another. They hit one another, and then they go their separate ways. But what you usually see afterwards is that over time, one of them will come up to the other and usually start to groom. That is, start to do that where they kind of run their fingers through their hand, through their hair, they pick out parasites, they do a favor, they do something that feels good for the other baboon, and then hopefully that baboon will reciprocate. And the idea there is these individuals will have to continue to interact across time. And so it would be a good thing to make up after that conflict, show them that they still respect them, that they still want to get along. So humans do this, non-human primates do this as well. I've also looked at what are called morphometric cues of mate quality. Now that's a lot, but morphometric just means that it has to do with the shape or the style of the body or the face. And these are cues of what are called mate quality, that is, characteristics that one would look for in a potential sexual or romantic partner. What I've done is I've published work looking at the relative importance of 3 different characteristics to people's perceptions of others' faces, that is, especially the faces of potential romantic or intimate partners. And we identified 3 traits that seem to be quite important. We compared the relative importance of 3 different traits. One, I've already mentioned this, something called sexual dimorphism. That is the degree to which a person's face looks prototypically male or female. There are certain traits that systematically differ between men's and women's faces. For example, men tend to have, I'll try to orient myself in the camera here, men tend to have relatively wider jawbones. That is, the distance from particularly this point to this point tends to be larger among men, and I should say very broadly, males within a species compared to females. This is true, again, of humans and non-humans as well. Men tend to have more facial hair. Men's eyebrows tend to be somewhat thicker than women's. Men's eyes tend to be slightly smaller than women's. Now, that is not to say that it's significantly so, but if you actually measure in terms of millimeters, men on average do tend to have smaller eyes. Women tend to have more prominent cheekbones. So that is the degree to which you can kind of detect whether see a person's cheekbones easily. Women are more likely to have that. And the idea is that many of these traits are actually controlled by or influenced by the amount of hormones that an individual is exposed to, both in utero, that is when they were much younger and in the womb, as well as during puberty, which can shape the development of these traits. So we looked at the degree to which people care about these sexually dimorphic cues, compared to also what are called what's called fluctuating asymmetry. That is the degree to which a person's face does not appear perfectly symmetrical. The logic here is that when a person's face is more symmetrical, so everyone's face, basically from very early on, is programmed to be fairly symmetrical. That is, DNA codes for what's called bilateral symmetry. And this is, again, true for humans. You'll see this among other species as well. Most species have this line that you can draw down the center of the body and fold one half over the other. That's bilateral symmetry. Now, the extent to which you remain symmetrical, though, is dependent on a number of factors, such as how often you've been sick throughout your life, whether you've had any developmental issues growing up, or what are called developmental perturbations, that is, disruption to development. So it's an indicator of generally a person's developmental health. That is, if you are more asymmetrical, you are less symmetrical, that may indicate that you have had a harder time either finding proper nutrition, fighting off disease, etc. And so that could be an underlying cue that one would look for in a potential romantic partner if, say, you were going to pair up with this person for a while, have children with them, and ultimately pass on those qualities to children. Also, color cues to health. And when I say color cues to health, I don't mean skin color tied to things like ethnicity, but rather various levels of pigments within the skin. Turns out there are 3 predominant pigments in a person's skin. There are red pigments that contribute to flushness of the skin. That is when a person blushes. That would be what's called skin blood perfusion. That is how much blood is perfused or distributed within the face at a given time. Also, yellow pigmentations. So yellow pigmentations contribute to, an easy way to think about this is how healthy or glowing a face tends to appear. So someone can be kind of more washed out looking. You'll see this when someone is sick. They tend to have kind of what's called a pallid look to their face. And so having more yellow hues to the skin, this yellow pigmentation, can actually contribute to perceptions of healthiness. And then there are also blue pigmentations, which we don't perceive very easily consciously, but they actually do contribute to our perception of a person's health. Though yellow and red pigmentation seems to be some of the most important for these assessing a potential romantic partner. So we looked at these different characteristics, compared them, And one of the interesting findings that we determined was that people really cared about these sexually dimorphic cues, the degree to which a person appears more male or female, compared to symmetry or color cues to health. And this might suggest that there's something about those underlying levels of hormone that which contribute to sexual dimorphism that are very consequential to people's choices in who they select as a partner, potential romantic partner. Going from there, where I've actually progressed in my research is I now study the intersection between morality and romantic relationships. Morality broadly referring to what we consider right or wrong. One of the earliest studies I looked at at that intersection, at that crossover, are looking at what are called May-December romances. This is kind of an old-timey term. If no one's heard this, I don't blame you, but May-December romances refer to those in which someone who is much older is paired up with someone who is much younger. So I think colloquial terms, things like, a gold digger, right? Someone who is a much younger woman who's pairing up with a much older man, or it's kind of strange that women seem to have the derogatory names for these age mismatched things, because you also hear the term a cougar, right? A much older woman with a much younger man. Well, people tend to morally disapprove of these kinds of relationships. That is, compared to an age-matched relationship, age-discrepant relationships, or these May-December romances, tend to be perceived more negatively. And there are a number of reasons that might be the case. One that we tested in this study is we thought that the degree to which a relationship is perceived as transactional, that is, that these two people are together because they are explicitly getting something from one another. That is, maybe the much older men tend to have more social status, they tend to have more money, and so a man is going to have relatively more money when they're older, and men tend to seek women who are relatively younger. And so he may be expecting to get something like sex from a partner, versus a woman who's much younger who gets involved with a male who's much older might be interested in, say, his money or his support of her. So to the degree that the relationship is more transactional, people may judge these relationships as inappropriate, compared to these age match relationships where maybe you can be more certain that people are getting together because they have shared interests, because they have shared life goals and that they're the same stage of life. How we tested this was we looked at people's attitudes towards age-discrepant relationships compared to age-congruent ones, and we looked at the degree to which people's attitudes towards sex work or prostitution helped to explain attitudes towards these May-December romances. And in fact, that's what we found, is that people who were more likely to disapprove of sex work or prostitution were also more likely to disapprove of these of age discrepant relationships, that there was crossover in how that explained moral disapproval of these kinds of relationships. From there, where I've gone is I've started to look at the morality of a particular category of intimate relationship that is becoming more and more popular, called consensual non-monogamy. Those of you who have not heard of this, monogamy refers to romance, a pair bond between just two individuals. So that is, if you're finding a sexual or romantic partner, you're only establishing that relationship with one other person, and you're doing so exclusively. Consensual non-monogamy includes things like polyamory or swinging or open relationships, where partners agree that they can form these intimate attachments with other people outside of just that pair bond. Now, one of the interesting things about these relationships is these two tend to be relatively more stigmatized. They tend to be more disapproved of compared to monogamy. And yet, when you look at the scientific research on these relationships, they seem to be achieving comparable relationship quality to those who are in monogamous relationships. There seems to be this stigma against these relationships, which we don't quite understand. And so a lot of my current research is looking at the reasons for this stigma. Why do people tend to disapprove of consensually non-monogamous relationships? And in fact, I currently have a grant where I'm collecting data to address this question directly. So this is some of my work. Again, this is the work that I've published in peer-reviewed journals. I've had to collect this data, send it in, and people rip it apart, and it's a very arduous process, but ultimately a very rewarding one, because the ideal is that this is information that has been vetted, and so can be more likely to be trusted, or at least it's more rigorous in how it addresses information about romantic relationships, etc. Aside from all the professional stuff, I want to give you a few personal details about me. Just one thing, I'm a huge nerd. I love video games. I love playing video games. I like board games. For a long time, several years ago, unfortunately, I haven't found a lot of people to do this with, but I used to play Dungeons and Dragons with people. And I'll say, if you ever get the opportunity to play Dungeons and Dragons, I highly encourage it. If you are going through anything in your life, if you need to self-examine yourself, playing D&D and role-playing with other people will help you work through those issues. Don't know what I mean? Give it a try. You'll see. I would not consider myself a Redditor. However, of all the social media sites that exist, so the ones that I care to spend time on, I actually really enjoy Reddit. And the reason is, I think that it's populated by a number, I think it's, on average, I would guess that it's populated by people who are above average in intelligence. And I also just like the particular way in which social media is shared on the site. If you go to Facebook, if you go to Twitter, if you go to most other social media sites, what you have is the option where if you are scrolling through your newsfeed and you see something that you really like, what you can do is you can simply react to it. You can like it, you can get angry, you can cry, you can laugh, etc. There's no option, though, to dislike something, to say, hey, I don't think this belongs here, or I don't really think this is really newsworthy, or something that I want, people should have popping up in their newsfeed. And so Reddit has that. And so whether you see something on Reddit is really a combined total of the upvotes and downvotes that it has received, which I think is just possibly a much more responsible way of consuming social media. We'll talk a little bit about social media in this class as we go on, and some of the benefits and risks of it. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so in a small town called Wind Gap. It's about an hour north of Philadelphia. I went to college at a place called Albright College in Reading. I got my master's at a place called Bucknell, which is in central Pennsylvania. And then I moved to Michigan for about 5 years. For 5 years. I moved to Michigan for about 5 years, that's where I got my PhD. I lived in Pontiac, which is about just northwest of Detroit. So I spent a lot of time in Detroit during those years. Something fun about me, I really hate dressing formally. What you'll see in these recorded videos is generally I'll try to look professional and put together, but I also might wear a black t-shirt. I think the most important thing, and this is my expectation for all my students, is you should be dressing comfortably when you are attempting to learn something. You want as few distractions as possible, and I think that it's important that you're relaxed, that you set aside time to really engage with the material, and you don't necessarily have to worry about how you look. I suppose that's a nice thing about taking an asynchronous online class. If you haven't picked this up already, I actually really enjoy public speaking. I enjoy it not because it is inherently enjoyable to me, but rather that I recognize it's a challenge and it's a puzzle. My puzzle is I have to say something in just the right way that it makes sense to the people that I'm talking to. I have to explain something in a way that really resonates with my audience. And sometimes I accomplish that, sometimes I don't. When I do, though, it's very rewarding. And so I think I've gotten okay at that. I think I've gotten pretty good at that. And so now I actually really enjoy public speaking. I've figured out that puzzle. If you're interested in what wavelength I'm at, typically I drink tea, caffeinated tea. I think that compared to coffee tends to make me too stimulated, overstimulated. My attention actually tends to wander more if I'm overstimulated by coffee compared to tea. Tea is nice, right in the center. Not sweet tea. I realize that's a big faux pas, but I actually find that I drink too much sugar if I drink sweet tea. So unsweetened, caffeinated tea is where I'm at currently. And if you have any troubles with caffeination or feeling tired, you might actually be drinking too much coffee. We'll talk about this when we get to the section on consciousness and drug use, but what happens is if you start drinking too much caffeine, you can become more tolerant to it. So one of the most effective ways to consume caffeine or really any kind of drug is to do so in moderation, such that you do not become physically dependent on it, in this case for stimulation. What I am not. So I have been teaching for more than 10 years at this point. I have a fair amount of experience in it, and of course I have an experience doing research. But what I'm not is, I mean, I kind of have gray hairs going on here. It's kind of hard to see now. What I'm not, though, is someone who's been teaching for decades and decades and decades and decades. And so there may be a lot of questions that you all have of me that I'm not going to address here, that I do not state clearly, or that I do not explain well. If that's the case, I actually encourage you to reach out to me. I'll go over where you can do that, how you can do that, the email address that you can send your questions to get my response. I respond very quickly, but I realize I don't know everything, and I realize that there are things that I would love to address if I could. So I think I'm humble enough to say that I don't know everything, and there's tons of wisdom that I'm lacking. However, what I am is someone who has had experience in psychology, in psychological research for quite some time now. So if any of you are thinking about graduate school, if any of you are thinking about how to apply a degree in psychology, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Give you some pointers about what directions you can take in your career. And of course, I think we'll have fun in this class. There's plenty of good content here. So that's the resource that I am to you. Before I can set you free to look at the first week's set of videos and begin class content, I need to give you a bit of a tutorial. So if you've never used Blackboard before, now if you're accessing this, you've already figured it out. But what I want to do is I want to give you a little bit of a tour of Blackboard and how this class is going to be organized so that you have that for yourself. I also need to ask you to complete something called a student information sheet, which I will highlight when we go over Blackboard. And then I want to go over the syllabus and look at what a normal week is going to look like. All right, so let me open up Blackboard here. So first, what you're going to notice is that I have pared this down to precisely what you need to know. There are no extra bells and whistles in my Blackboard class. What you're going to be introduced to first when you open this up in Blackboard is this What is Due page. You can access on the left side here. This, as you would guess, tells you what is going to be due each week. What I recommend you do is follow what's listed here in the order that it's listed. So before next Thursday, by 11:59 p.m., you will need to do the following. Watch the 2 lecture videos listed under recorded lectures. That includes the course introduction, which you're already listening to because you're hearing this. Then get into Chapter 1, the history of psychology. After that, access the textbook and read the Chapter 1 material that covers what we cover in the recorded lecture. Then complete and submit your Chapter 1 exam. And then there will be other assignments listed here. This week, what you'll need to do is complete the student information sheet, but there may be other assignments including hypotheses, research proposals, worksheets. So keep an eye on this. This is your lifeline. If you go over to course schedule, this is something that you'll see printed in the syllabus when we go over it, but it tells you everything that we're going to do. This is your quick guide to figure out what's due each week and what content we're going to be going over. First thing you should notice is really over here on the right side. So if you don't feel like going to the what is due section, you can see exactly what will be due each week on the right side here. Besides that, it tells you the reading for that week, as well as the topic. Now this class is going to be split into 4 different units. In the first unit, we'll be going over psychology as a science, what makes it a science. And of course, anything that is a science must follow the scientific method, so we'll learn a little bit about that. I'm sure you've gotten the scientific method many times in other classes, in high school, in other college classes. I'm hoping to take a different approach to teaching the scientific method, one that highlights how specifically it's helpful in the study of the mind. When the mind is studying itself, there are some extra precautions that you need to take in performing research. So we'll get into that. Then we'll get into some nuts and bolts. We'll start talking about biology, neurons, and then how we can link neurons together to learn something, create a memory of knowledge, of experience within the nervous system. From there, we'll move into subjective experience, that is the experience that it is to be somebody and have a conscious experience. So we'll go over what's called sensation and perception. How does your brain sense the world around you? And then how does it make sense of what it senses? Perception. And then we'll go into consciousness, which is going to be a wide shot, but it'll also include specifically topics on sleep and psychoactive drugs, which is always a fun one to teach and listen to. Then we'll close out the semester in Unit 4, where we'll talk about psychological development. That is, by this time, we'll have a good sense of what aspects of our psychology develop. From here, we'll look at how those developments change across time. And then when we look at pathology, psychological disorders, we'll get into what happens when our brain does not work the way that we really want it to, or at least that we don't anticipate it to. At the very end, we close everything out with a comprehensive exam, which I'll go over in more detail again in a moment when we start talking about the syllabus. But again, this is a quick guide for you in case you don't feel like bringing up the syllabus. Next, looking at syllabus and course docs. If you are looking for something and you cannot find it, chances are it's in this section. So first of all, the syllabus is here. You can access it, download it here. The textbook, just click on this link, you'll access it. The textbook is free. You do not need to buy it. It's open source. And so you'll get that here. You can download it as a PDF, I believe, or access it directly online. If you have any issues with technology, the technology FAQ document is something that the university's retention committee put together for students. This will really, if you're having any troubles, I recommend seeking this document out first. There's a lot of really good advice in here. If nothing is addressed by this document or there are troubles that cannot be resolved on your own, make sure to reach out to the USC help desk. The email is in this document. It's sadesk, helpdesk at usc.edu. The Opportunity Scholars Program. This is a program hosted through Student Support Services. It offers individual tutoring, advising, workshops, especially for those who are new to college or perhaps do not have a history of going to college. They host student activities and events. They have computer labs that if you are part of the Opportunity Scholars Program, you have access to, and other resources as well. And some may qualify for financial grant assistance. If you have any temptation to seek out support, to create, if you're looking to create community, meet people, the Opportunity Scholars Program is honestly one of the best resources for you. So you can fill out the application here. And if you're interested in joining the advisory board, if you find that you love it so much, you can also get involved that way as well. The student information sheet that I'm going to ask you to complete for this first week is right here. Very basic stuff. What is your name? What is your major? What year are you? Why are you taking this class? What do you expect to get from this class? Giving me this information helps me to tailor this class to my audience. I like to do that. I prefer to do it. Otherwise, you're not getting the most out of it that you can. So please complete this. Give it to me. You don't have to give it to me if you complete it. It submits online. But get this done by the first week so that I can get a good sense of who I'm teaching and how I can provide the most value to you. Research participation. There is a research participation component, a requirement to this class. If you click on this link, there's a lot of information in here. It's all summed up in this handout. So when you get a moment, go through this handout, read the details. In summary, by the end of the semester, before the comprehensive exam is due, you will need to earn 2 online study credits and 2 in-lab study credits. You earn a credit by completing one of the online or the in-lab studies. The online studies can be accessed here. You click this folder and it will take you to several links with studies, with requirements. If you meet the requirements for that study, you can participate. That's pretty easy. These studies tend to take up to a half an hour, sometimes 45 minutes, so be prepared for that. But you would need to complete 2 of those studies by the end of the semester. The in-lab studies, these tend not to start until several weeks after the semester begins. What these involve, these are hosted by Dr. Gottsman, one of the other psychology professors. She has 2 labs, one in Walterboro, one in Allendale. Eventually, when she has these up and running, you'll be able to access these Google Sheets and sign up for a time slot. You can sign up for that time slot. You arrive in one of her labs at the time that you signed up. It usually takes, based on previous semesters, 5 to 10 minutes to complete this. So there is that extra expense of coming into a lab, but usually you can knock out both at the same time and it doesn't take too long. So read through those. Again, these instructions for participating are also in the handout, but if you have questions, please contact Dr. Gottsman directly. If you do not wish to participate in research, we cannot coerce you to do that. That is one of your rights. So if you do not want to participate for any reason, you have these alternative assignments that are available to you. The instructions are here. In short, rather than participate in a study, what you can do is you can read a peer-reviewed article, something that has been published in a peer-reviewed journal, and then write a summary, a 2-page critical summary of that article, and you'll turn that in for credit. So keep your eye on this research participation requirement. I will remind you several times throughout the semester, but get it done early if you can. This is one of those things that you don't want to hold off until it's the comprehensive exam. You have 1,000 things to do, and now I have to participate in research. Keep your eye on it. And if you have questions, please let me know. All right, going back to syllabus and course docs, I also have a folder for several optional readings. These are what they sound like. They're optional. You don't have to read them, but sometimes throughout the semester, I will reference something that I will want to, if you want to learn more about, I'll put a reading about that topic in this folder. And if there's any subject that you say, wow, this is really interesting to me, and you want to reach out to me directly and say, I want to read more about this, but I don't know where to start, I will find that for you, and I will put that in this folder. So this is a resource available to you. And then for Chapter 7, there are going to be some worksheets. You can access those worksheets here. Each week, the recorded lectures will post. So again, the first week, you just have this course introduction, as well as the Chapter 1 lecture before you have to take the exam. So you'll access these here. These will pop up. These will refresh every, technically Friday, midnight on Friday. Then the hypotheses and research proposals, I'll go over these again in more detail with the syllabus and after this little bit of a tutorial, but the outline is here. This tells you absolutely everything that you need to know about how to complete the hypotheses and the research proposal assignments for this class, complete with step-by-step instructions and examples. So please use this resource for yourself. At one point, I will be, as part of my lecture, I will have some PowerPoint slides with some tips and guidelines, further tips and guidelines for completing research proposals. I've uploaded them here so that you can access them whenever you wish. And then when you submit your links, when you submit your assignments, these are the submission links. Exams are listed here. So the Chapter 1 exam is currently available. So once you're done with done watching the videos, you can then access the exam. And your grades are also here, so you can check your grades here anytime. One thing I'll say about grade calculation, if the numbers are entered into Blackboard, your grade will be calculated correctly. So if you want to know what your grade is, check this out. And then near the end of the semester, you'll be asked to complete some course evaluations. You can access those here. Okay, so now what I want to do is look at the syllabus. So a lot of this will be redundant with what I've already said. To highlight a few things, again, this is PSYC 101. I'm Dr. Justin Mogilski. That's my email address. If you want to get in contact with me, please do use this email address. There's an option on Blackboard to send a message. This will get to me less reliably. If you want a quick, prompt response, use this address. This is the course description. You can look at that on your own time. The required text can be accessed here as well as on Blackboard. There's some learning outcomes and objectives. But of course, grade determination. What will go into your grade? First, there is a participation component. What participation looks like is I'm able to see whether you've accessed the videos, as well as how often and whether on time you turn in your assignments. If you are on time and you are accessing the videos, you will get a participation grade for that. Exams. Each chapter concludes with an exam. Some chapters have 2 exams. In total, these exams are going to be worth 40% of your course grade. They are all administered online, of course, and they'll be due 1 week from when they're available. And they are all multiple choice. At the end of the semester, there's a comprehensive exam. This one exam will be worth 20% of the course grade. That sounds like a lot, but you will be well prepared for this, and I will have a helpful study guide that I think should make your life a bit easier. I'm not a huge fan of comprehensive exams myself, but I see the value of them, and I do think it's important that at the end of the semester, you try to unite everything that you've learned throughout it. All right, hypotheses. The hypotheses are worth 10% of your course grade. In short, these are short 1-paragraph descriptions of a research hypothesis that you will like to test. The instructions for completing these hypotheses, like I mentioned, are on Blackboard, and I'll look at those instructions with you in a second. And then the research proposals, what you'll do is you'll take one of your hypotheses and then write a proposal to elaborate it. That is, we'll be learning about how to test research hypotheses using various designs. You're going to design an experiment to test that hypothesis, and you will write this out in these proposal assignments. There's then also extra credit. Typically how this is done is if you have to complete 4 research participation credits for this class, each additional credit, so that is, let's say you do 2 online studies, 2 in-lab studies, anything that you complete beyond that will count as extra credit. So for each additional credit, you will earn 1 additional percentage point on your final grade. That's quite a bit, so please be aware that this opportunity is available to you. Grade calculation, like I said, you can believe Blackboard as long as all the grades are entered into Blackboard. It calculates correctly. Class expectations. A lot of this is boilerplate, but a couple of things. 1, you'll need Blackboard. Where do you start? Here are the instructions if you need that. One thing that I recommend is if you're not in the habit of checking your email frequently, this will be the main method by which I contact you. So either get into that habit or link your USC email to your personal email account or some account that you do check. If you miss my emails and that's why you miss an assignment or you're not up to date on something, I have no forgiveness for that. So please also email me if you expect to be unable to complete assignments by their due dates. I do try to work with students, particularly if there's a medical or family emergency. Research participation, I've already mentioned this, but please be aware that if this is not finished by the end of the semester before the comprehensive exam, it will impact your grade. The course schedule is on the next page. Academic conduct, the big thing is don't plagiarize. Plagiarism, passing someone else's work off as your own, it has a very, very severe punishment up to and including expulsion. But at the very minimum, usually you get a 0 on the assignment or possibly a 0 for the class. Do not get caught plagiarizing. Just don't do it. In this, now we understand that there are AI tools for generating text. These are also, there are some kind of mechanisms in place for screening the contributions of AI to student assignments as well. We have a program that we submit assignments to also cross-check with other classes and with content generated elsewhere on the internet. So don't take that risk. You can add or drop classes at this link here at the registrar, and if you have need some kind of accommodation, you can contact DSS, Disability Support Services, and of course, let me know as well so that I can help with that. All right, this is the course schedule. You've already seen this. And then this is the grading scale. So if you have questions about how your grade will appear at the end of the semester, how it will be converted from a percentage to a letter grade, here you go. All right. I also would like to go over this research hypotheses and proposals outline. Again, this is uploaded to Blackboard. It is underneath hypotheses and research proposals, that tag in Blackboard. I want to read this introductory paragraph, and then I want to just kind of open this document and let you peruse it at your own time to understand how these assignments are going to go. I will be covering in more detail what you need to do for these hypothesis assignments in the Chapter 2 introduction. But here's what I'd like to read. So humans form beliefs about what is true and what is not. We form these beliefs by observing the world, detecting associations, and using this knowledge to make decisions. Now, brains are well designed to detect and record patterns, but sometimes we detect and record patterns that aren't real. We believe things that seem true, but are not. To overcome this problem, we have developed the scientific method, a procedure for assessing a belief's veracity, its truthfulness. For this class, you will practice using the scientific method to examine several beliefs that you have about the human mind and the behavior it produces. Over the course of the semester, you will write 4 scientific psychological research hypotheses and 2 research proposals. A research hypothesis is a tentative statement or prediction about the relationship between 2 things, or what I will be calling variables, an independent and a dependent variable. For example, you may believe that a person's political beliefs, such as being Republican, Democrat, or independent, is somehow related to their willingness to wear a mask during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, though this answer to the question might seem obvious to you, you can't be certain that your belief is true without evidence. So each research proposal will be an opportunity to take one of your hypotheses, these things that you predict that you believe are true, and then design an experiment to test it. Descriptions for each assignment begin on the next page. Please be mindful of the due dates, which appear on that course schedule, and each assignment should be submitted in Blackboard. Make sure that you follow these formatting guidelines for submission, and then as you go to complete these assignments, read through the outline for each. So there's a hypothesis outline, which tells you how to do the hypotheses, and then separately there's the research proposal outline. Read through this. If you have questions after seeing the Chapter 2 introductory video, please contact me, and of course I am happy to meet and help you with these assignments. All right, so that's that. Again, back to our PowerPoint. I think we've gone just about over everything that you need to do, that need to know to succeed in this class. A few other bits of information. As you watch the other recorded lectures, I want to note how I organize my slides, because this will help you organize your notes for studying later. At the very top of every slide, you're going to see a section header. And this is a header that's going to be there for as long as we are talking about that particular topic. So in the first lecture, we're going to talk about history. I will have several slides dedicated to simply presenting different aspects of history. Underneath that, the first bullet point will be a major idea or topic. Then anything that is indented underneath that particular heading is going to belong within that heading. So for example, we'll talk about psychoanalysis and Freud. Those 2 points, that Freud is known for a lot of things, the unconscious and early life experiences, each of those belongs under psychoanalysis. Likewise, when it says processes in the mind which occur automatically, or thought processes, memories, interests, and motivations, those belong underneath unconscious. So each of those are describing unconscious. So you should be, as you're taking notes for this class, which you should do, as you're taking notes for this class to study later, I recommend organizing your notes in this way. Also, I'll be using examples A lot. What I'll do is I will give you a definition of something, I'll explain it a little bit, and then I will usually relate it to something that you already know, or something that is much more, that is not technical. When I mention these examples, write them down. They will not usually appear on the slides, so make a note of them so that later when you're looking at your notes, you go, geez, psychoanalysis, what was that? And then you see that you wrote down an example that I gave, and you can say, yes, of course, I remember that example. That helps me remember what psychoanalysis is. So organize your notes in this way. Write down the examples that I use. All right. So what are we going to cover in this class? We're going to talk about some pretty difficult subjects. I want to warn everyone of that. We're going to talk about psychological disorders later in the class. We'll talk about drug use and abuse. We'll talk about sexuality, simply because this is my area of research and I think extensively about relationships, sexuality, etc. We'll talk about consciousness, what it means to be a conscious organism. And related to that, we'll talk a little bit about whether humans have free will or not, whether we are, in many ways, like a squishy computer. What features of our nervous system and the way that our brain and our nervous system works, how does that mirror what a computer does? What are the similarities? And of course, what are the differences? Because we are not just computers, but we do share a lot of features with them. Before we can get to this really juicy stuff, though, we gotta go over the basics. And that makes it sound like this isn't juicy. It is. What I want to do in the first chapter is go over how psychology is a science and why it needs to be a science. What does it mean for something to be a scientific study of the mind relative to other styles of knowing or generating knowledge? We need to start there, and that's going to be where we take off. So again, that's all for the introduction. Move on to the next set of videos, and if you have questions, of course, contact me. Thanks, everybody.